Hi, Black Hollywood Live fans. Today on Justice is Served, rapper Troy Ave and why police can now stop you at any time for any reason. Stay with us on Justice is Served.
You are tuned in to Black Hollywood Lives. Justice is served.
Hello, Justice fans, and welcome to another show where we cover the latest in legal news every single week. Thanks for joining me, attorney Chelsea Galicia, and my co-hosts, who are also attorneys, Shaka Smith and Yemi Abayomi. Right? This week, success. All right, fantastic. Let's dive into the news, which was good news this week for rapper Troy Ave as he found out that he wasn't going to face murder charges, but still some pretty serious charges stemming from a shooting in at a TI concert back in May 25th. So, Shaka, what's the lowdown on this one?
Yeah, so generally good news, no murder charge, but I think they already expected there to be no murder charge, at least on his attorney's behalf. So his bodyguard, Ronald McFadder, was the one who was shot and killed, and they always contended that he never killed his own bodyguard, which ballistics seem to confirm. However, he does have a charge for attempted second-degree murder and for gun possession charges.
Those are also felonies, those other gun charges. So even without the second-degree attempted murder charge, he is facing decades in prison.
Yeah, but I would think that at least for attempted second-degree murder, you're still... you can maybe argue self-defense, so hopefully that'll get him out of that charge, but the gun possession charges will probably...
And I guess if we listen to the lyric, or I just read it, I haven't heard it, the lyric that came out of a track after he was arrested,
yeah,
that sort of is what he implies.
Yeah, he recorded a track while he was in prison at Rikers, which he's allowed to do. Inmates are allowed to make phone calls, and you can use your phone call however you want. And so in it, he says, that he flipped the tables on this person and grabbed the gun, and he professed his innocence. So that might be one of his ways of just getting his message out there to the world that, again, it was a self-defense, an instance of self-defense, and, he should be walking.
And of course, if he used the gun that someone was using on him in self-defense, then maybe the gun charges might disappear as well.
Which I don't know how that makes sense in light of the video that came out. And yes, his attorney said that the video doesn't show everything.
Yeah.
The video shows him pulling out a gun, and you can see him firing at somebody who's off the screen.
Yeah.
So at this point, I don't know who the supposed victim of this second-degree murder attempt was. I guess he's going to say it's the guy who he saw shoot his bodyguard.
Yeah, I'd imagine. And you could always argue that in the VIP room prior to that, if there was some shooting, he took the gun from another, potential shooter, which might get rid of that gun charge.
So very recently, within the last, day or so, he entered his plea in court of not guilty. He was in a wheelchair because I understand he's been shot in both legs, and the claim was that he had shot himself, but I read that the trajectory of the bullet seems like it was like off the ground, going upwards in his leg, but out the thigh. That was on the right, and then another bullet wound on the left leg. So it is pretty, I guess, believable that he was in some way a victim here himself too. And I think his attorneys are pretty confident that they're going to be able to prove that. They want to get him out on bail. They don't think that he's a flight risk. What do you think the judge is going to say about that?
Well, I think he'll probably be granted the bail, and given his condition, I think he won't likely be considered a flight risk.
Right. He has no criminal history, and so that's something that speaks in his favor in terms of trying to get out on bail.
And perhaps he can profess his innocence in a recording studio.
I apparently eager to do that.
He should be careful about that. I mean, one of the things that people do, prosecutors, they'll try to use, he would try to use a rap song maybe in his own defense,
yeah,
but you should be aware that prosecutors do try to use lyrics, and in New York, it's no secret that the NYPD looks at rap lyrics just to get a sense of what's going on in the streets and what crimes might have been, committed, attendant to certain grudges between gangs, and so he should just be aware of that. I think there was a circumstance where someone actually bail was withheld because he posted a YouTube video threatening the district attorney. So you can hope that lyrics will work for you, but just be aware that they can sometimes work against you.
It's probably good advice. I hope he's listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so moving on to the Supreme Court case that now basically says, and by basically I mean absolutely, says that police officers can now stop you at any time for any reason, demand your ID, and if it turns up anything, including like a little traffic warrant, you can be arrested on, or searched on site, arrested on site, even if it started out with you doing nothing wrong at all. We're talking here about the case of Utah versus Strife, where a guy who was in front of a drug house that was being investigated was questioned by a police officer just about what's going on in that house. And the officer demanded the man's ID, this Edward Strife, I believe his name is.
Because he had a hunch and no actual reasonable suspicion.
Just a hunch, right. Yeah. And so he asked for the ID. The ID, he ran it, turns out that the guy had a traffic warrant. And then, when there's a warrant for you and they can arrest you, they can then search you, obviously. Yeah. And in that search, the police officer found meth in his sweater, and so arrested him for that. And then, the case goes up. And in law school, I learned about the fruits from a poisonous tree.
Absolutely,
right? So this has to do with the Fourth Amendment, where the police can't gain something from an illegal search and then use it against you in court. That used to be a no-no. But apparently now it's kind of fine.
Right. I was so surprised when I read this case. I'm pretty sure this is illegal. Like, we all learned this in law school, the exclusionary rule. It was a huge, huge piece of criminal law. Everyone takes that in law school. So this was a really surprising decision to see.
Why is it not on the front page of the news? This is huge.
It's astonishing to me that it's not, because this is massive. I mean, it used to be that police needed to have reasonable suspicion that you were doing something illegal before they could stop you and ask for your ID. Now, rules out the window. They can ask you at any time.
And I think because Mr. Street, he's white, and so I think the issues of race that are so prominent with these illegal searches and seizures weren't brought up
in this case.
In this particular case, so you didn't get the national presence of the case. And so I think it's very disheartening, and I think Sonia Sotomayor expressed in her dissent how disheartening this is, because this really will disproportionately affect minorities.
Yeah, so as crazy as this story was, and the precedent that it now sets, which kind of seems sort of inconsistent or shocking in light of the other similar cases on this issue, it came to the news because of Sotomayor's blistering dissent. She dropped a bomb. Everybody was talking about this dissent. Not even people were talking about the principle itself of what this case now stands for. But the dissent was awesome because it combined her real life experience, her, she's obviously legally intelligent of knowing the case law that comes before, but also works of art that, like the new Jim Crow, the book, and other works that are not just of art, but are of an artful form of telling us, showing us how things are for groups of people that we may not belong to, right? Mostly for minorities, although Sotomayor is a Latina. So I was really surprised, but not surprised, that she also included things about, like, the Ferguson report, showing that this isn't an isolated incident. This is systemic.
Oh, she went into great detail, referencing the Ferguson report, referencing lots of statistics from various police jurisdictions about the prevalence of warrants, and how many people are going to fall under this new ruling, where basically anyone who has a warrant out for their arrest, if they are stopped, it's kind of like beware, because anything that's found on you in that instance, there's no protection against that.
And I think it's important, because here what they were really saying was, because it was mere negligence and a good faith mistake that the officer made in performing this illegal search.
That makes no sense.
So they're going to want to make some sort of distinction that, it was mere error. And we know in the law that we have these sort of rules behind mere mistake. And if it's just a mere mistake, we normally overlook it because the outcome would be the same. And I think she really wanted to show that the outcome won't be the same, because this type of mere mistake is institutional. It's systemic. It's not a mere mistake.
Right, absolutely. And so she speaks against the likelihood that now blacks and Hispanics will be sort of targeted very easily, that they are already stopped at a much higher rate, and this is just inviting police to do it all the worse, right?
Yeah, and she certainly brought up like the civil death you undergo when you're arrested from your employers or landlords or anyone performing a background check.
And this also negatively affects, like disproportionately, poor people who may get like a parking ticket or a speeding ticket and then can't pay it, and then they get a warrant for their arrest, and then now they can be searched, and you know, they go down the legal rabbit hole that we have in the justice system.
That's right. And I mean, I think it is really important to emphasize the impact of just the number of people that have warrants and how easy it is to go into communities where you do suspect something's going on, but you really have no basis for assuming anything illegal has been committed by a certain individual. But this could potentially lead to these dragnet searches where you're just going in there with the hopes of finding out that this person has a warrant, and then using that to get to do some more digging. And it's strange because the court talks about how, oh no, this won't possibly lead to dragnet searches because one of the tests in the test that they use to determine whether I guess the evidence can be used is whether the circumstances that led to the finding of the evidence is attenuated, and two, the flagrancy of the officer's actions. And so typically that's something the government has the burden of establishing that it wasn't a flagrant use. In this case, the guy said, it was just negligence. I didn't mean to make that mistake.
Which is now the great defense of every officer.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the other surprising, or maybe not surprising, thing about this case is that the majority opinion was written by the only black justice, Clarence Thomas. Surprised, not surprised?
I mean, again, not really surprised. I mean, there's a reason I think Sonia Sotomayor is called the people's justice, because she really understands these issues as people that are being affected by them, and maybe Clarence Thomas is a disconnect in that way.
Yeah, I think that he is probably just as well known as sort of being disconnected from the reality of people's experiences, which is ironic because he is African American, but apparently anybody is capable of being disconnected from reality, even if you're, a member of the group that's disproportionately affected by bad case law.
Why Sotomayor's dissent really resonated with a lot of people, because even though one justice might be accused of being disconnected from the community, she was very straightforward about, as you mentioned, her personal experiences, talking about the indignities that come from being stopped, especially when it's an unlawful stop, how it feels degrading, how it then allows them to take you to the police station, get swabbed, have them search your person, have you touch you in
even if you're not guilty
very
of
sensitive
anything.
places.
Yeah.
Exactly. Things like this that you don't really think about, and some people will say, oh, well, you shouldn't have been walking down the streets with meth anyway. But even still, there has to be some baseline or some threshold below which, you can't have these indignities forced upon you.
The me of maybe 10 years ago would have said, okay, well, the moral of the story is don't walk down the street with meth. Yeah. But if you look at it that narrowly, you're totally missing the point and the larger implications. Yeah. First of all, just on the meth thing itself, that we know that the rates of drug use is pretty similar, if not less, in minority communities than it is in white populations. Yet African Americans and Hispanics get stopped and arrested and prosecuted more for those crimes than white counterparts.
And this only adds fuel to that disproportionate fire. Exactly.
And so now it's not just like about drugs, it's about who we target going after them. Yeah. So it's sort of like PSA time here, guys. I don't know what the message is. Don't go outdoors when you see a police officer if you think you might have a warrant, because you are completely open to a search now, which is so amazing in this day, because just after the Orlando shootings, we hear a lot of people very indignant about their Second Amendment constitutional rights. Yeah. And then we have...
If they had taken a look at the Fourth Amendment more strictly, then we would definitely not have this case.
It is so bizarre how laxed people seem to be about infringements on their Fourth Amendment
rights. Searches and seizures versus
their gun rights. Yeah. And I think it's maybe because, the right to bear arms is such a quick, easy thing to know and understand, but understanding unreasonable searches and seizures requires a little bit more sophistication.
To some degree,
make no mistake, this is a much bigger infringement on your rights than anything that the
Than a background
gun control
check,
people
yeah.
have been trying to do recently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just a media issue, really, because I was surprised I hadn't just casually read this story. You know, I had to go hunting for it. And so I think we have a media problem with our legal system.
It requires a little education.
Well, and there's also a question of, had Sotomayor not written this kind of blazing dissent, because really the articles that I saw were not about the decision.
The opinion.
Yeah.
The articles were about her dissent. So let's say it was something a bit more mild. Would we have even heard about this really significant change?
I think that's an amazing point, because I don't think that we would have.
So we have to hope that very quickly a case is being kind of filed, and that will move up to the Supreme Court, that will somehow
Overturn
define this decision to some degree, or make this a very narrow decision.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add the point that I was trying to make before about the fact that before it was the government's burden to show that there was no kind of it was just negligence, kind of a lower level. They weren't being flagrant about it. But the way they speak about the need to show that that's not a dragnet search. It actually almost there's no history of the police officers recurring into community. It actually almost puts the burden on the defendant to show that the police are constantly targeting these communities, and they purposefully went out there, where that's not even a burden a defendant is supposed to show in the first place. So it also almost changes the burden for the prosecution in the first place, which is another big thing.
So this is a big deal. So now you all have to know that at any time when you're walking down the street, if a police officer asks for your ID, you must comply.
Yeah.
No question about it.
You can try to fight it, but we have case law that now kind of goes in their direction.
Yeah. Pretty scary, actually. Okay, but let's move on to a good word from our sponsors who are trying to help small businesses. So small business owners, it's time to be honest about how you feel when dealing with your day-to-day admin work. Admit it, you can't stand it, it's a total grind. The truth is, over 5 million small business owners felt exactly the same way until they discovered FreshBooks. For those of you who haven't heard about FreshBooks, listen up. These folks are on a serious mission to help small business owners save time and avoid a lot of stress that comes with running their business. FreshBooks is the dead simple cloud accounting software that's transforming how small business owners handle their paperwork. Using FreshBooks to create and send an invoice literally takes about 30 seconds. There's no formulas or formatting, just perfectly crafted invoices every time. Your clients can pay you online, which often means you end up getting paid a lot faster. There's a super handy deposit feature so you can invoice for a payment up front when you're kicking off a project. FreshBooks can even show you whether or not a client has looked at the invoice you've emailed. That's an interesting feature. This is only a fraction of what FreshBooks can do for you. FreshBooks has created a super intuitive tool that makes creating and sending invoices extremely simple. It's fast, all online with instant notifications. Plus, send automatic late payment reminders. Lots of people need those. And you can create custom branding to reflect your business. You owe it to yourself to feel the full effect of FreshBooks on you and your small business. Plus, if you have any questions, their customer service is absolutely fantastic. No robots, real people. They care so much that if for some reason after 4 rings, someone from customer service can't pick up your call will be routed to all employees at FreshBooks, so you're guaranteed to get help. For a 30-day free trial, just go to freshbooks.com/geek, G-E-E-K, and enter Geek Nerd Tech in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Thank you so much, FreshBooks, for your support of Justice is Served so that we can bring this to you every single week. All right, and now to another surprising decision. The district attorney in Louisiana has opted not to prosecute 2 Alabama college football players who were found with marijuana and guns. What do you think of the DA's reason for not pursuing the charges?
Well, I mean, initially I was kind of like praising the decision, thinking, "Oh, what a wonderful decision." I read a little bit deeper.
What a wonderful what?
Decision. Just thinking, like, wow, here are 2 black football players who have been caught with marijuana and guns.
And a white DA said, "Oh, that's okay."
Like,
Well,
wow.
actually using their prosecutorial discretion.
I thought to myself, wow, what a different day and age we've come to. But but then we get the reasoning behind it, and the reasoning was he really did not want to ruin these 2 football players' lives.
The quote quote from the press conference
Yeah.
is just almost unbelievable. He's like, I was not willing to ruin the lives of these two young men who had spent so many years or their youth working out, sweating, while we were all sitting in air conditioning.
Exactly, and I read that quote, and immediately I said, "Oh no, this reminded me of Brock Turner," like, and it made me go, "Am I a hypocrite? Am I a hypocrite for thinking this?"
Well,
is a
no,
good
but
decision?
very quickly, there's a big, massive difference between rape and marijuana and even gun use.
And as I thought about it, I said, "Wait a minute, yeah, huge difference." So I think it's a good decision in one respect, but at the same time, it looks like they were guilty.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I appreciate the fact that he's sensitive to the fact that these are young kids, they're college students, perhaps on a bright path. Alabama is a super huge football school. Who knows what their future might hold in terms of making it to the pros. But at the same time, people do need to be held responsible for their actions. So while I like the fact that he was sensitive to their backgrounds and their potential, I think athletes shouldn't necessarily gain favor in the justice system just because they're athletes and just because they're athletes for either big blue chip schools or prestigious schools or anything like that.
Well, in his defense, and I'm not sure how great of a defense this is, he tried to say that there wasn't enough evidence to prove the case, and so that was the first reason he gave, and then he backed it up with this second reason.
Well, I mean, they found the marijuana and the gun.
That was my question. But when he first said insufficient evidence, how much evidence more do you need when you have the officer?
Perhaps maybe about who it
Well,
belongs to, which of the two men.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly could have been concern about, I believe, with Cam Robinson and Lawrence Hootie Jones, of whether they would be accusing each other of possession, in which case it would be hard to prove. But I mean, it seems like the DA
they
could have
really wanted to.
It looks like they could have really done some more work.
A little investigation.
Yeah.
But,
But Cam Robinson's all SEC, and so I think that obviously weighed into the decision. He started ever since he was a freshman. He's a junior now. So I think it was really a football decision.
Yeah.
But I believe they could have been held to account to some measure and still gone on and had bright, dazzling careers. I don't know if probation would have been an option
Well, so apparently in Louisiana, I guess the minimum sentencing is actually a little bit severe when you have a criminal possession of a firearm paired with drugs being present. So I think typically criminal possession of a firearm, it's you're not allowed to be, or it's a minimum sentence of a year.
Oh,
but then it shoots up to 5 years if it's in the presence of drugs.
But I think they could have probably charged them with something lesser. I don't know, disrupting the public. Yeah, there's a bunch of little
They were
ordinances.
two guys sitting in a car
There are a bunch of
at
ordinances.
2:30 in the morning.
I feel like something should have been done, and I do agree. I'm happy they're not, their football careers are not over, but it seems to me very odd that they get no penalty whatsoever from the criminal justice system.
They definitely aren't relying on the criminal justice system. Hopefully that coach will impose some.
And Nick Saban has indicated no sanctions as of yet for the players.
Yeah, apparently he's a big believer in second chances, which is
No, that's good. But I did read that they're expected to undergo drug testing
And that was a question
and
that
drug
I had.
counseling,
Yeah.
Okay.
firearm safety counseling, things like that.
But all administered by the program by which that wants them to remain stars on the field. So that's always questionable. Do you know what I mean?
They could do nothing, and I'm sure there are schools out there that would do absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I
appreciate the fact that they're trying to do something.
I know, that's why I'm only like halfway irked by this one. I don't like the special privileges to the athletes, but I do like how you sort of weigh, like, really, are we going to spend taxpayer resources on?
I think they should have charged them with a lesser thing and maybe pled out to probation and given them a probationary period. And at least that way you send some message that you're not above the law. You will be taken to task for these things, and they do have an impact. And of course, a second, offense would be far worse.
I think that's a great middle ground.
Yeah.
Not necessarily ruining people's lives for what some might deem a small infraction if we're talking about, for example, just the drugs.
And the gun somehow was worrisome. I don't know why we just swept. Like, where did this come from? Like, why does he have this gun? Like,
Why does he have a stolen gun?
Yeah.
And then, there were two guns. One was a stolen gun, and one was, I suppose, one of their guns. But why are these two college kids sitting around with guns in their laps and a stolen one?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds weird here in California, but down south, I think it's a different scene.
But not to get not charged at all. Usually you're found with criminal possession of a firearm, you get charged. So
Apparently not in
that's
this
a bigger
case.
offense.
I just hate for people to walk away with the thought that athletes are above the law. They shouldn't be above the law.
And that's
They
what this
should
case
still
gives
be-
you.
Right.
Just the same way Brock Turner was far more offensive, but this certainly gives you that same message.
Bad
so.
taste in your mouth.
Yeah.
All right, speaking of something else that gives me a bad taste in my mouth, the Confederate flag is still flying high in Mississippi, or at least, in the upper right, I guess the way we're looking at upper left corner, it's still
The last state?
displayed loud and proud. Right, the last state in the Union to still have the flag with the Confederate flag inside of it. North Carolina did away with it last year after the Dylan Roof shooting of the 9 people at church, and Mississippi looked at like 20 some odd bills that they were considering about changing, and nothing came of it.
Yeah, there were a lot of institutions, University of Mississippi, I believe Southern Mississippi as well, got rid of the Confederate flag.
Yes.
There's still a large portion of the population there that believes that the Confederate flag is a symbol of Southern history.
Yeah, which
and
includes this thing called slavery, which is a thing not to be that proud of.
people tend to kind of overlook
By
that.
that
and
proud,
just
I mean
say,
of not proud of at all. But so one man, an attorney, he's over this, and he says that he has filed a lawsuit to get the flag removed as hate speech because he's concerned about the message it sends to the next generation.
That it incites violence and
Yeah, so this is an interesting approach. A little review of the First Amendment. We have the right to free speech, but there are certain things that you can't do. Can't incite violence or, try and solicit somebody for an illegal behavior or threaten somebody. So this potentially falls under one of the exceptions to your right to free speech, hate speech. So if this guy can prove that flag is hate speech, could he be successful?
Certainly, but I think he's going to have trouble proving it's hate speech given the amount of people that do seem genuinely to love the Confederate flag and are not violent and or by any means. So I think you do have.
But I don't even know if you have to be violent to be hateful.
Hate speech alone should incite some violence, and so I don't think with what there are different.
Is it different? Is it inciting violence is one exception to the free speech, and then hate speech. So I don't think that it requires any action, any inciting of violence, anything. Just if it's hateful towards a group.
But a lot of people will say that it has kind of a neutral. I hate to use the word neutral, but it has this kind of like
very neutral.
They would like to say that it has this neutral origin where it is just a representation of the Confederacy.
Yeah, but everybody with half a brain knows that it's not
but
that.
They argue that it's a symbol of the Confederacy, which stood for many things. They will argue this, many things, one of which, yes, includes slavery. But stood for states' rights and things like that. And that these people like the Ku Klux Klan and Dylan Roof, that they kind of misappropriated the image and have turned it into a bad thing, but that the image itself was not originally bad.
I mean, that sounds. That's a great.
That's their argument.
Yes.
This is not my perspective.
But usually
completely lacks.
But usually a component of hate speech is that it does incite violence. I think you have so many instances where that's not the case.
And so many cases where that is the case.
Yeah,
Dylan Roof's website or social media was covered in these Confederate flag pictures.
Yeah,
and
when
then
you
he
see
went
people
and shot
hanging from
9
trees with the Confederate
people.
flag behind them, I mean, it's definitely a symbol that's used.
I
in
think a lot of
connection with
people use
violence.
symbols to promote violence and misappropriate symbols to promote violence. And at the same time, I do believe it does not belong on the flag because of this discriminatory history and the racism that was also cited by in Moore's lawsuit. Is that he believed it was.
So that's more of a 14th Amendment issue rather than a free speech.
And that's the issue I see being more salient too. 'Cause I don't think it's going to it'll fall under hate speech. Just too many instances of it being around and not having that element of hate speech. So I think you'll find it more discriminatory and racist, and because I would say the average minority would see that flag and assume they're not welcome. Assume that.
Yeah. They're hated by people who promote that flag.
Yeah, so I do think there might be a little bit more leverage on the 14th Amendment claim.
Okay, so what about the argument that this guy has no business using the courts to try and get this done? If the legislature doesn't pass something, then it's a no-go. I personally am like that. This person doesn't understand the way the law works. This is a totally feasible and valid way to bring about change.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you think something's violative of the Constitution,
You have the right to do that. If you have
Whether it will
standing,
work is a different question.
Yeah.
But
right. Assuming you have standing, you prove basic things like you face harm yourself and things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't see anything wrong with him bringing this claim.
and we did see the governor of Mississippi declare Confederate History Month of April. And so I actually thought that was a really great argument to get rid of the Confederate flag.
Because you don't need it?
Because you don't need it. You have a month that does, I mean, there are parts of the Confederate history that are positive in some ways for different people and families and heritages. So I actually think it's a great thing that they can have a Confederate History Month. And on those days that it's appropriate, you show this was the history of the flag. This is what it meant at one time. This is how it might have been misappropriated. I think that's a really good middle ground for getting rid of the flag on the actual flag of Mississippi.
Oh, all right. I agree with this moderate position. Doesn't happen often. Happened today. Okay. And finally, the family of the one terror victim in Paris who was Californian. Her family, her name was Noemi Gonzalez. She was a college student going to a Cal State school. Maybe it was Cal State LA, I can't remember which one. But she was studying abroad in Paris when the terrorist hit there, and she died. And now her family is suing social media giants like Facebook, YouTube,
Twitter and Google,
saying that they were providing material support to ISIS and similar groups by allowing their message to be spread, to recruit people, and now they're going forward with this case. What do you think is going to happen here? A lot of uncertainty here.
Well, I mean, the thing is, YouTube, Twitter, Google, all of these platforms where people can provide information, post up user-generated content. There's so many people using these platforms that it's hard to blame one of these platforms and hand them liability when they have so many users and they cannot possibly be aware of every single instance.
But it seems that when people violate their other smaller things, that they are on it pretty quickly.
They do, but that relies upon the users to flag the content, alert Google or YouTube or Twitter, and then Twitter can take it down. But it seems as though there are many, many accounts. For example, I think I read somewhere that ISIS had like 7,000 accounts on Twitter or something like that, where it's just hard to pinpoint every single thing, and that the moment that you take one down, the next one is going to pop up.
Yeah, and Facebook and Google both released statements saying that they do remove things when they're flagged by other users in the community.
And I think they both use the language when they're made aware of it. So I guess the question is, what level of obligation do they have to become aware of these? Can they be passive and wait for it to be reported, or do they have to actively seek it out?
Well, I think reasonable awareness, and I think the reasonable awareness is that sort of crowd vigilance.
All right, so I mean, when I first read this, I'm like, well, this is a good way to perhaps go back. I mean,
They do make it very easy to flag posts that you find offensive. They make it very simple to flag posts on all those different platforms.
But some people don't find this stuff offensive.
I actually understand that Facebook does take somewhat of a more aggressive approach to removing these.
I mean, because there's like videos of beheadings on there.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I think a lot of investigative organizations can actually use someone's Facebook page to glean information, because a lot of these terrorist organizations do use Twitter, they do use Facebook to announce their
plans.
Well, not necessarily their plans, but even it might be to proclaim their allegiance, or to show like a beheading or something like that. So they're definitely using it in a certain way. I think Facebook also takes a look at the friends of people who are on these accounts, and it looks into those things. So in one instance, it's helpful to kind of see the web that's there, but unfortunately that platform can also be used to disseminate a message that we don't necessarily want to see.
And you have to have a balancing act between freedom of speech and privacy as well. So,
but there are, things like these recruitment videos, and I mean, social media can be really strict. Like, a woman showing a nipple is like a huge offense.
But I think that goes
But a
back to
beheading
the,
is
but that,
kosher?
no, but that goes back to the reporting. I think it's really difficult to have a sense of, I mean, imagine all the people in the world that are on Facebook or on Twitter or are using YouTube. It's impossible, I think, for one corporate organization to have enough eyes to monitor all the pages of all of the people who are posting multitudes of information every single day, every single hour.
And you don't want to filter and say, oh, we're blocking this country from ever posting, or we're blocking anything.
Oh,
that
I
has
don't
to
think
do,
that the lawsuit was about countries. It was about users posting.
No, but what I'm saying, the way Facebook and these other companies could somehow control this is to only have broad blocks on different areas or different uploads. And to do that, they would be chilling freedom of speech. And so I think if you're going to say the best way to stop terrorism is to block all activity from these 2 or 3 regions.
But this freedom of speech thing, when we're talking about private companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, they're not the government. So they're technically allowed to infringe upon your free speech because the Constitution talks about the government infringing upon them, not social media platforms and other private individuals or companies.
Well, unless they're overreaching for maybe religious reasons. And so now no Muslim can post on Facebook, unless that's how broad these things get. And I think they would argue that's what you would have to do to stop anything of the nature that they're being sued for.
Oh man, this is a ugly, sort of sad. We're not probably going to go anywhere great with this, but I don't know. I do. You know, the poor dad who's going through this and who's trying to.
Well, and I think this may be part of that grieving process.
Yeah, and I don't think he wants anybody else to go through this. I think he's trying to use his daughter's death to try and do something great to prevent this from happening to anybody else.
It's also a fine line, though, in terms of what type of speech are we? How bad does the speech have to be before Facebook or Twitter starts excluding people? I mean, there's certain speech that's of course going to be provocative. Right. It's going to be controversial. Is Facebook the one that's responsible for drawing the line between what the public should hear and what they shouldn't?
It's a good point.
I think the overreaching that they could possibly fall into would lead to more lawsuits for Facebook. So I think they have it right in the way they're doing it so far.
All right. Well, that will have to be the last word for this week on Justice is Served. Don't forget to like, comment. You can tweet me at Chelsea Galicia.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Shaka Strong.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Yemi.
All righty, everyone. We'll see you next week on another episode of Justice is Served.
From executives Keven Undergaro, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us. info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I am the official voice of Black Hollywood Live, Scipio. Instagram me at KingXOBay. Thanks for tuning in.
Hollywood Redefined.
The views expressed here are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.